Mr. Francis, thank you so much. It was very important for us to meet you. It's your first visit in Georgia, and you met with Prime Minister of Georgia, many members of government, and also we know that Prime Minister said that he met with you in Davos several months ago, and he invited you in Georgia.
Yes.
So what about Georgia? How is your impressions?
Well,
and what you wanted to see here?
Yes, well, look, first of all, professionally, I think the commitment of Georgia to intellectual property and to advancing intellectual property is really impressive. And that comes out of the meeting, of course, with the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's personal commitment, but the whole government's commitment. This is loud and clear. So this is very impressive, and it is matched by action. It is not just an empty commitment. It's matched by action. And then, if I may add, of course, personally, it's really a privilege to be here in Georgia. It's a dream, in a sense. And Georgia certainly lives up to its legendary reputation for a warmth of hospitality, a generosity of hospitality, and a warmth of welcome, which is quite exceptional. And naturally, it's a very beautiful country.
You mentioned about the commitment.
Yes.
How important is this commitment?
Well, I think it's very important because here what we see is commitment at the highest level of government. And that's not always the case in countries around the world. And that means that it's easier to be translated into action. And I think that's very important in sending a signal to trading partners, to potential investors. And it's very important in sending a signal to the local economy that actually we're all involved in this world in a major transition from an economy in which physical capital was the basis of wealth generation to one in which increasingly intellectual or knowledge-based capital is the centre of wealth creation. And intellectual property is important in its role of securing the competitive advantage that knowledge resources give.
We hear very often, and especially here now when you are in Tbilisi, that intellectual property system protection is so important within the agreement which was signed 2 years ago. It's a deep and comprehensive free trade agreement. Can you explain us why it is important and how it will help Georgia?
Yes, well, I think first of all, as I said, it's important to send the signal to partners of commitment and willingness to proceed down this path. But I think also it's very important for the country's economy itself. It's very important to protect and take advantage of those areas in which Georgia has specialization. We could look at agriculture, for example. We could look at the specificities of Georgian agricultural produce, which I think are really outstanding and which you don't find anywhere else. And intellectual property has a role of securing that competitive advantage in Georgian agriculture. But equally, we can look at the Georgian creative arts. And intellectual property has an important role in ensuring an economic viability to performers, Georgian performers, to Georgian creators, authors, composers. It also, in the science and technology area, which is increasingly important in the world economy, it's about 30% of world trade is in knowledge-intensive or technology-intensive products and services. So there again, it's a very important incentive to those who work in research and development to ensure that their ideas, their innovations will be able to be protected during a period for exclusive commercial exploitation, during which time they're able to recover the development costs, invest in further research and development, create, as it were, a virtuous cycle.
And I want to ask you about the memorandum which was signed yesterday. What can you tell us about this?
Well, I think we have a long-standing cooperation between the World Intellectual Property Organization and Georgia. Since the re-establishment of independence, we've been involved in cooperation with Sakpatenti from the start, with the Georgian government generally from the start. And this, I think, brings that cooperation to a new level.
New memorandum.
The Memorandum of Understanding brings that cooperation to a new level. So we recognise that new level. We recognise the engagement of Georgia with the WIPO and the, if I may say, modest role that WIPO can play in assisting Georgia to realise the development objectives and the economic objectives that it sets for itself, which increasingly are in the area of innovation and taking advantage of the specialisation that exists in Georgia.
The news for us was also a new academy. What will be the main name of this academy?
Well, in the transition of which I spoke earlier of going from an economy or a world economy in which physical capital was more important to one in which intellectual capital, knowledge resources, knowledge workers are increasingly important, I think there is an important cultural change, a cultural shift involved. I mean, if you stopped the average person in the street and you said, go into that shop and steal that blank CD, most of them would say, no, I won't do that because it's theft. But if you handed them a CD and said there's a copy of, let's say, Microsoft Office on it, they might do it. They might do it. The value of the blank CD is perhaps $1. The value of what's on it is perhaps $100. So I think the whole world has this transition to make to understand that increasingly education, sensitization to the value of the products. What we're now doing is going to become a broadcast which is protected by intellectual property.
How would you assess the progress and what problems do you see?
Well, as I said, I think the commitment from the highest level to intellectual property in Georgia is very impressive. And then I think we see that right from the start of the re-establishment of independence and the establishment of Sakpatenti, there has been a lot of emphasis placed on this. The Georgian laws are excellent. The participation of Georgia in the international intellectual property community is excellent. Georgia is party to the vast majority of treaties that are administered in this area by WIPO. Georgia participates extremely constructively in the multilateral arena, and in particular in the multilateral arena in intellectual property. So all of that, I think, is extremely impressive. Now, the task of constructing an innovation-based economy is a long-term task. It's not an easy one because innovation is a complex process and involves everything from the educational system to the availability of venture capital to assist entrepreneurs and innovators in commercializing their new ideas and in getting university research out into the productive sector. So it's a complex task, and I don't think any country has managed to do that very, very quickly. But if I may say...
On which level we are?
Well, very good level, because if we publish a Global Innovation Index every year. Georgia features about number 74 on that, which for a well, you would find that India is in the 60s, for example, or China is in now about the 30s. So it's a very good performance, if I may say, for a lower middle income country.
It's for the first time?
No, that was the third or fourth time we've published that index.
No, about Georgia.
About Georgia, well,
new index.
The new it's a global. It's a benchmarking really, and what we find is that when you look at the lower middle income category, Georgia is a high performer, a very high performer. And you equally, if you look at the region, Georgia is again a high performer. So I think all the signs are very positive, but it is, as I mentioned, a long-term process developing, you know, an innovation culture and an innovation economy. Georgia does have an advantage, if I may say, in not having natural resources. When you look at the outstanding innovation performers in the world, Switzerland, for example, which tops the index, has only lakes and mountains and human resources. So the human resources is the important part. Sweden, Denmark, the other Scandinavian countries, Singapore, Japan, 70% of the territory is non-arable. Many countries without natural resources know that what they need to rely on is their human resources, and human resources are the source of innovation and creativity, and thus give the soundest basis for an innovation economy.
We want to hear also from your recommendations when we're talking about how Georgia can protect rights abroad, and the best example is Georgian wine.
Yes, indeed. So it's one of their specialties to protect, and a very valuable one.
As you mentioned.
And Chuchela, yes, indeed. Well, at WIPO, the member states have just concluded a revision to a treaty which I think will assist in this process. It's an international agreement which establishes an international register for geographical indications. So the geographical indications, the names of geographical localities which have associated with them products that owe their specific characteristics to the attributes of that geography, will be able to be registered on this index of geographical indications and protected in all the other participating countries. So Georgia, I hope, will, and I'm sure, will participate as it does as a constructive member of the international community in advancing this agreement now that it has been concluded. And it would mean that you could register from Georgia on the international register any of these Georgian indications. They are already registered on one such register, but this will be much more widespread, and it covers more a higher level of protection, let's say. And we hope that the geographical participation in this new system will be widespread, which would be giving Georgian geographical indications, we hope, a very widespread protection around the world.
And also the last question about regional workshop on the Beijing and Marrakesh treaties is held in Georgia. What is the importance of the treaty?
Well, we have 11 countries participating in this, and it's the first such workshop we've held in this region, this part of the world. The importance of those treaties are, first of all, the Beijing Treaty protects, if you like, actors. It protects audiovisual performances. And that, for various historical reasons, had been omitted in the international legal framework protecting creative works. So it's a big, I think, advance. And the Marrakesh Treaty deals with a very noble purpose, and that is that approximately only about 5% of published works are available in accessible formats to persons who are blind or visually impaired, available in braille or audio formats or other accessible formats. What that treaty, the Marrakesh Treaty, does is require contracting parties to establish an exception to copyright to allow, for example, a library or a blind association to make a copy of a published work in an accessible format, and perhaps more importantly, allows those accessible formats to be exchanged internationally. So when the system is fully operational, when we get a widespread participation in it, a blind person in Georgia or a blind association in Georgia could borrow a book in Braille or another accessible format from, for example, Canada or any other country around the world. So it greatly enlarges the range of works that will be available and accessible to blind persons. Obviously, we hope will improve literacy levels and productivity levels for this important but disadvantaged community.
Thank you very much, and thanks for your time.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.